ICQPodcast episode 482, AMSAT President Drew Glasbrenner. Well, hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, and welcome to episode 482 of your ICQ Amateur Radio podcast, supported this episode by Paul Elliott, Golf Zero, Tango X-Ray Lima, and our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin M1MRB, Chris, Mike Zero, Tango Charlie Hotel, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie, Golf Zero, Charlie India Bravo, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief. This episode's feature is an interview with AMSAT President Drew Kilo Oscar 4 Mike Alpha. Well, as always, it's your very kind generosity and your showing of value that keeps your ICQ podcast show advert free. And we'd like to thank Paul Elliott, Golf Zero Tango X-Ray Lima, along with our monthly subscription donors for their very kind support. You can show your value for the ICQ podcast by visiting our special page, which is icqpodcast.com/donate. Where the value you get from today's show, be it be informational or entertainment, you can turn into a monetary figure and send that amount to us, and that goes towards our running costs and keeping your show produced for you every fortnight, advert free. Right, well now we're going to join the team. We're going to join Martin, Chris, Frank, Bill and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including an antenna booklet for beginners and a Linux kernel for ham radio. As always, hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to the ICQ Podcast, episode 482, and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Martin. Hi, guys. Good to be here again.
Yeah, good to have you. Moving to the other side of the pond, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin, everybody. 482. Sounds like an activation or something.
It ain't far off, is it, Frank? Also, your side of the pond, we have Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Sorry, I did that wrong. Good evening. Is that better, Leslie?
Yeah, we also have Mr. Leslie Butterfield, my side of the pond, Mr. Leslie Butterfields, G0CIB. Hi, Leslie.
Oh, good evening, Martin. I'm still here.
You're still here. No problems at all.
Glad you're feeling better. Leslie.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah, I know you haven't felt very well for the last few weeks, but I think you're on the mend now.
Well, spare parts were difficult to find on eBay.
Well, that's true. Mr. Martin Rothwell's not with us tonight, M0SGL. Unfortunately, he was at a works venue and it was supposed to finish in time for him to get here, but unfortunately overrun by 2.5 hours, so he isn't going to make it tonight. So, hopefully he'll be back next time. Our first news story, and I think you guys are going to like this because I know myself and all the presenters so far have been quite excited about this. It's a free antenna booklet written by Jukka Siitari. Great little book he's written. I think he deserves the credit for it. Frank, you spotted this as well. What do you think?
Oh, I'm with you on it. Jukka Siitari, we believe is a man, and if not, I certainly apologize. If you're dealing with international names, sometimes you don't understand a feminine form or what have you. One of my comments that, Martin, we talked about in our run-up to the recording of the podcast was it's a fairly comprehensive antenna book if you're reading it and you don't have the wherewithal to read, say, one of the big antenna books. It covers a lot of the topics that you need to know to operate with various and sundry antennas, but it's not too much of a technical reference. It's sort of the right size for the reader before they say TLDR, as the kids say, too long, didn't read. You can read it, and you can read it in one sitting if you are so inclined. And giving it away, it's in various languages. It's even in the version of English that I speak, living in the south of the U.S. Hi. And I'm very impressed with it.
Yeah, as I say, I've only put the link in for the English version because that's the one I found, but I'm sure if his email address is in the file, so I'm sure he would certainly come back to us or you and give you the links for the various other languages. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I got about halfway through it last night. Still got to work on the rest of it. But what I read, I was pretty impressed with. Yes, it's like a good general overall manual so that you have a good understanding. But at the same time, he has enough detail. You can actually, maybe build some antennas out of this thing. Because he talks about all the math and how you figure out, the different lengths to start with, and, the little gotchas some of them have, like picking the right counterpoise length for a certain kind of antenna and that kind of stuff. So I was pretty impressed with it, and I'm generally happy that, this is publicly available. That's really nice too, because it's complete enough that it could be a book.
Yeah, I give you that. At the moment it's laid out for A4 size, or probably letter size in the States. But, if you laid it out for 9x6, it would be a very, very credible book that you'd have to spend money on. And it would be worth spending the money on. So it is a very good book. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, what can I say? There are books out there that are off the scale in technicality and aren't much use to radio amateurs. There's some that are very, very practical, how to do this. And I would put this book straight in the middle of that. It gives a broad, good understanding of HF and VHF antennas. Not too technical, otherwise you get lost. I don't think it goes to that depth, but I would say it's a very, very good book indeed. And all the things it talks about, wind loading and all that, which you very rarely see information like that. I would recommend this thoroughly. It's a very, very interesting read indeed, and it will be added to my file. And when I need some information, I'll certainly go through it and find the relevant bits. So overall, I think it's an excellent job. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah. Well, one of the ones that I spotted when I thumbed through it quickly was he was talking about, we talk about RF flows on the skin of a conductor, and he was mentioning how deep it penetrates at certain frequencies and how far it penetrates in copper or aluminium. And that,
I did see that. Yeah, I did see that. Yes.
Yeah, I'd never seen that before anywhere. So I thought, that's it. That was something that I found very interesting, I must admit. But Chris, any thoughts on this one?
I think it's wonderful. I've not looked at it in some depth. It's 62 pages, a lot of detail. Just looking through some of the tables, some of the pictures it's got on here, even things like what attenuation you might expect on different types of coax at different frequencies, and ladder line, that sort of different type of feeder. Huge amount of detail. I do like the very first thing you see on the first page is license to use all radio amateurs in the world. So in other words, this is free for us all to use, which I think is very, very much in the spirit of amateur radio. This person, Jukka, could very much have sold this to the RSGB or to the ARRL or to the National Society, published this as a book, and actually, done this as a commercial thing. It is of that quality. But they decided to make it available to us all, which I think is very, very much in the spirit of our hobby.
Thumbs up, I say.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all in agreement. And when I spotted this one, I thought we just have to give this gentleman the credit for what he's done. And guys, if you find it of use, drop him an email and say thank you very much. But from the ICQ podcast point of view, I thought it was worth mentioning because it's something nice available to us.
Martin, I would say he's put an awful lot of work into this.
Certainly has. Right, moving to our next news story. Hamlib has been named winner of the 2026 Amateur Radio Software Award. Now, some of you won't know what Hamlib is. I understand that. But it's a very, very useful piece of software that maybe is not something you've instantly recognized, but it really helps with a lot of the other pieces of software you have on your computer. So, Bill, do you use Hamlib in any way?
Actually, I do. The first step for my packet radio stuff is step one is the story that we're going to do later. Step two is control the radio interface through Hamlib. So it's an open source programming project that gives basically an interface between your radio and whatever software you're using. Most folks will be familiar with it because it's baked into WSJTX for FT8, baked into FLDigi. I'm trying to think of some other ones I've used. But basically, you'll see it on some Windows machines and some Macs, but almost everything on Linux for interfacing with the radio will work through the Hamlib libraries because it's a straightforward, easy things for folks to use. So they won an award, and that's pretty cool. Amateur Radio Software Award Committee. That's I vaguely think what we talked about this a couple years ago, but at any rate, they every year they internationally pick software projects that enhance ham radio and promote innovation, freedom, and openness in amateur radio software development. And I actually know one of the hams that's on the awards committee, Sebastian, KI2D's on there. So the whole thing's really cool. And it's really nice that they do this and give this out. I also saw in the article you sent us that they're going to do a special event station for K7A at the end of the year, November 27th through December 7th, to celebrate Hamlib. That'll be pretty interesting as well for those that go after special event stations.
Certainly will. I'm sure our Edmund will be looking for it because he's big into special event stations. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, yeah, I think, as you said at the start, Martin, Hamlib is something that a lot of amateurs probably don't even know they're using. It's one of those things that's behind the scenes that I think, as Bill was describing, provides that interface, that it's a library of software that lets developers, write the software to work with lots and lots of different radios without having to, do a huge amount of work, because the Hamlib libraries provide that interface, and it supports many, many different models of radio. So I also use some other software called OmniRig, which I think is pretty similar. It lets you, although possibly slightly more of an application, that lets you do a similar thing. So I use OmniRig, for example, to sync up my SDR play device at home, my EAC radio, and also my logging software. But Hamlib is very similar and does the same sort of thing. So yeah, it's very, very useful, and a lot of people are probably using it and probably don't even know they're using it. So yeah, if you've got software that lets you read from your radio what frequency you're on, and you put that into your log, for example, or you've got something that controls a rotator, this allows all that to kind of work together. So very useful software, and yeah, very, very well deserving award recipients.
Yeah, I agree with you on this one. Frank, I'd say, I'm sure you use software that has links to Hamlib. I'm sure you do.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree with the other presenters. And we'll go even further. I think this software award is something that will continue to spur on development in amateur radio software realm. And I think that's a real blessing to us. And for the reader who doesn't use this or thinks that they don't use it, they may use it and not know it. It's one of those things. There's an old term, something should be seen and not heard. Well, this one is it should be heard but not seen. That is, you shouldn't have to fool with it. If you use FL Digi, you have something called FL Rig that's a similar kind of interface. Imagine if you had alternating current coming into a house and there were no things such as these outlets. And each time you had to mechanically wire up some appliance to terminal blocks or something of that nature. Oh, well, we can standardize that, and we'll have these things called AC outlets or receptacles. And okay, so all you've got to do is have a now 3-prong plug. May sound a little cheesy as an example, but it kind of does that. It's that intermediate layer. Those that do software development certainly will understand that allows a larger set of software to interact with part of the machinery. And I dare say we would have much more software that would only work with the radios or other items that the developer personally owns without Hamlib. Because now when they're developing something, they can write for Hamlib. And as Chris said, OmniRig is another type of endeavor. So our listeners may use it and not know it. And boy, that's great.
Oh yeah, Frank. It's nice to see that most people are only interested in the latest, shiniest, sexiest thing. But this isn't that type of software. This is something that sits in the background and just works and helps us all. And it's nice that they've been recognised. Leslie, last words on this one?
Well, to be honest, I was one of these people that didn't know. And I was saying, what's this all about? And I've got a feeling that I've used it on bits and pieces in the past. And also the explanation of what Bill was saying was very interesting. So I thank everyone for sort of letting me know what it's all about, because things are starting to make a bit more sense now. Bill and Frank especially. Anyway, back over to you.
Yeah. Our hobby's so big you can't know it all, and
it's impossible.
yeah. But it's interesting. Sometimes you come across things you think, "Oh, that's how it worked," and that's good. Okay, we're cracking through these news stories fairly quickly at the moment. Okay, FCC has granted frequency use for satellite services, and well. I'm going to pass it to Frank first on this one because it is an American story, but I have certain concerns on this. Frank, over to you.
Well, listeners will know that we've covered this story before, and I think this particular podcast team had that story for AST Space Mobile's use of the 430 to 440 megahertz segment for what they claim is emergency or control telecommunications. Well, I think we all want people to control those satellites overhead. We've talked in recent podcasts about there's so much stuff and how do they get it down? And now we're using the idea of pushing it up so it gets hit in the Van Allen belt and gets demolished. So the principle is a good one. And I guess I'm just a little pessimistic, like the high-speed stock trading stories that we've covered. Oh, we won't cause interference. Well, that wasn't true in that story. So here we go. We talked about this. The FCC, in its infinite wisdom, decided to give them permission with specifics that we hope they will follow. If they don't, we just need to document if there is any interference that we can observe in the 430 to 440 megahertz frequency range, Martin. So it's one of those things that what we might think is the inevitable, it creeps along until it's a reality. And now it is a reality, at least for the time being.
Yeah. Well, I'll have my little two benefit in a while. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I guess it's a slippery slope, isn't it? Where we've got, it started off with a request. Now that seems to have been authorised. It's on the band that they share with us, even though we're perhaps not the primary user. I think the concern is also that, this is the FCC, which is the regulator in the US that's granted this permission. But we know that satellites cover very large swathes of the planet, not just the USA. So, are they having to get permission from regulators in other parts of the world, or is it because they're a US company, then this require permission from the FCC? I don't know. But no, I think this is probably pretty bad news for us, not just for us, but other folks. We know that ban is used by lots of different services. I think you mentioned before, Martin, key fobs, etc. So, this potentially, we know that things up in space cover very large distances because they're so high up that the line of sight signals can cover a very wide area and potentially could cause problems. Now, they have said it's for emergency use, but I don't think we've defined what emergency means. So how often this is going to be activated, how often they're going to be transmitting on those frequencies, we don't know, but potentially it could cause issues. I suppose they are going to monitor this. I'm sure the FCC will be keeping a close eye on how this goes, but they've this is the first step, isn't it, I suppose, of that slippery slope to, maybe we'll now get other commercial companies that make similar requests, and before we know it, our amateur bands and these ranges that are used by lots of different services, potentially could be impacted in a bad way.
Yeah, certainly could, Chris, certainly could. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
It's bad, but it's not as bad as it could be. So they gave him 1, 2, 3, 4. They gave him 5 spot frequencies. They didn't really specify how wide the bandwidth would be, but it's supposed to be telemetry use. And then with a duration of less than 24 hours. So the first one's 430.5. So let me look at the band plan. 430.5 is in the ATV simplex band for 70 SEMs here in the States. That's probably okay. Maybe. 432.3. All right, that is the beginning of the propagation beacon band. That may or may not be okay. 434.1. 434.1 is auxiliary and repeater links. That will be a problem if someone's using something really close or on that frequency. I'm going to skip this one. The last one's 439.5, and that is in the ATV repeater input, which may not be a real big concern because I don't know of very many ATV repeaters anymore. I'll have to go look at the repeater directory again to see that. But the fourth frequency, 435.9, falls right at the beginning of the international satellite only protected band. That's going to be the one that's going to be trouble, is what I'm worried about. Because if they're having a pass and they need to use the emergency telemetry while someone's trying to use a satellite that's close in that frequency, because they don't talk about how wide these signals are, what the bandwidth is, we may get some interference. And the thing that's hilarious to me is, in the article, it says the FCC has said in the past, the interference with ham radio was unlikely. Based on what data? That's a real easy one to add one sentence of context. Based on real world complaints of the past, based on our voluntary monitoring system, but they just, no, unlikely. Okay. So anyway, yeah, this is a concerning one. So we'll see how this goes, and I hope it doesn't set a precedence that this is free reign now to go hit the 70 SEMs band anytime you want something for satellite service.
Well, Bill, you make a great point. If I can postscript here, Martin, if you say, well, the basis of the lack of probable interference is that we have no prior complaints, it's before the requested system has gone into effect. So you wouldn't and couldn't have prior complaints. This isn't critiquing your comment. I'm just pointing out and amplifying what Bill says. If that is what the FCC's predicate is, then it, as Mr. Spock would say, that wouldn't be logical, would it?
No, it wouldn't be. Leslie, last words on this one before I get on my soapbox?
Well, I'm going to use a phrase I hope my American friends will understand. It sounds like an episode of Yes, Prime Minister, for those who remember this series.
No, but we could be experiencing it, Leslie. But please continue.
We had a similar thing in the UK where there was noise on the HF bands, and you could put your receiver down and you could see the noise on the screen, S9 and all the rest of it. You could physically see it in the front of you. However, the Ofcom at the time said, but it doesn't exist. Radio amateurs were jumping up and down, and the reason it didn't exist was because very, very little, we're talking about a handful of complaints, actually went in. So it was minimal. And I think that's what's going to happen here. Unless people put reports into the FCC and say this is happening, as far as they're concerned, it doesn't exist. That's my thought on it. Yeah. Over to you.
Yeah, well, I've already had my soapbox on this one once before on a podcast, but I'll just reiterate quickly.
I'll stand back.
Yeah, I would. My main concern is, and I've done this accidentally twice in the field and a couple of times at my house. I use 70 SEMS. The problem is most cars use 70 SEMS key fobs to unlock them. So if you are trying to get into your car, the receivers in the car are as wide as a barn door because they've been built for cheapness and nobody cares because it's always worked so far. If these key fobs have about 1 or 2 milliwatts, right? If you and I sit here with a handy talkie in a car park, nobody's getting in their cars because we swamp the receivers. Now, then you put that transmission into space, which has got a massive footprint, and you transmit down, and these receivers are the bottom end of 433. They're down around, bottom end of 430. They're between 430 and 433. And that will also cause a problem. The 434.1 is a repeater output. So it does worry me that that's the sort of thing that we unfortunately going to get. So I think what worries me more than anything else is not the fact that I can't use it, because I've stopped people getting in their cars accidentally because I'm transmitting, Mrs. B included. I've stopped her getting in the car. But that was me doing legal things. If you're going to just transmit in a massive area, you could have people trying to get into their car in an emergency situation and can't get into their car and are attacked by somebody or whatever else goes on because of a period of time. Now, they won't associate this with the fact that the satellite is communicating on UHF. The general public won't know this. The general public doesn't know when you're transmitting and they can't get in their cars in a car park. Why would they understand it from a satellite? Anyway, unless you guys disagree with me, that was my soapbox. Okay, no disagreement.
No disagreement. Although I did open up my Pi Star while I was sitting here, and my link frequency for Pi Star is 433.1.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of this mess.
Yeah. There you go.
We're not there to stop innovation. I mean, innovation's a good thing. We just want people to do it safely. And a part of that is the planning of the frequencies, the right frequencies for the right use.
Yeah. And unfortunately, us amateurs in the UK specifically, we're only secondary users in the band.
Yes.
So you could be affecting the military. These satellites could affect the military. They could also affect, as I say, they will affect general public. I mean, these wireless weather stations, they're all down there, that stupid frequencies in UHF. I'd love to have a wireless weather station here, but every time I transmit on 70 SEMS, or one of my hotspots would wake up because somebody's called us on the talk group, the weather station wouldn't work. So it's just one of those things, I think. That's my concern anyway. Right. Well, we're running short on news stories this week. Hopefully it hasn't been too boring for you, but we'll move to our last news story. And the Linux kernel drops X.25 for amateur radio subsystem support. Now, you're probably going to go, what's that all about? Well, originally, a lot of software and internet linking was done with X25, I believe. But I'm going to pass it to Bill first because I'm sure he knows more about it than I do. But so how do you, Bill?
Yeah, the AX25 protocol was mainly used with packet radio. I actually use this on the Raspberry Pi still this day because I have a TNC set up here with a, now I'm using an ICOM 3500, V3500 or something like that. That's plugged in the TNC. But basically what happened is decades ago, like the 90s, the X25 protocol was added to the Linux kernel. And so you could access packet radio through a networking stack. So a lot of stuff was written over the years, including the stuff I use to connect to the 2 meter packet nodes around here through the command line on Linux using AX25. This is kind of a historical, they're finally cleaning up the Linux kernel to try to make it a little more efficient. Back in the day, when you wanted to directly access hardware, you needed it in the kernel. And so there's a whole grocery list of security concerns when you run anything in any kind of kernel, whether it's the Mac OS kernel, the Windows kernel, NT kernel, or the Linux kernel. You alter and vulnerable that software, and you're basically running at that point as if you have system access and could do everything. So in the past, 2 decades, stuff has been moving out to where the users access the system, the application layer. And there's other stuff that I'll have to actually look into now to see how it works. But there's AX25 implementations that are even written in Python now. So that was one of the things that I was, bringing up in the pre-show as we were talking about the stories. It's like, yeah, today I use KISS attached to hook to my serial TNC, as a networking interface so I can, do packet radio. But I'll be able to do that with a Python script that does it through a virtual interface at the application layer. People that use sound cards for packet radio, AX25, I'm trying to remember the name, Dire Wolf or something like that, they're not affected at all because that is all user level access to the sound card, and you don't have to worry about that. But this is, a long-term good thing. I mean, you hate to see, stuff getting cut. But I mean, they cut old processor supports the other week. The new Linux kernels won't go on pre-64-bit processors anymore. No more dragging out your old 386 and running a modern kernel on it. You have to go use an old one. This is the same kind of cleanup they're going through there. If the code in the kernel was still maintained by folks and actively developed, it probably wouldn't have even floated up to the cutting board at this point. But there is no active maintainers, and it's not really long-term safe to have code in the Linux kernel that there's not an active maintainer to at least do security updates on. So the article you also sent around said the last update, the AX25, was 6 years ago. In case anyone's curious, that update 6 years ago was for 32-bit time. So to avoid the Y2K36 bug. Time keeping in Linux is set to second since January 1st, 1970. That's fine until you hit, I can't remember the exact date, April 8th or something like that in 2036. At that point, you run out of, 32-bit integers to use. So over the last, I don't know, probably about 10 or 15 years, folks that have been working on building software for Linux have, gone to 64-bit timekeeping so that they can continue to count the seconds since January 1st, 1970. So this is all part of a long, cleanup that needs as the Linux kernel matures. And, I play around with Linux. I have, when we get to the what have you been doing, I'll talk about, the stuff I've been doing with the Linux and the Flex and all other fun stuff I've been doing. But the reality is, the majority of the internet servers, are Linux based by far, with, Microsoft Windows Server probably being second at this point. A lot of the, Internet of Things, like the thing I pick on all the time is my dryer came with a Wi-Fi card in it. It's a little embedded Linux box. I've already vulnerability scanned it multiple times. It's fun. It's what I do at night when I'm bored. But point being is this stuff is everywhere. And so they got to keep maturing the Linux kernel. They got to keep stripping stuff out of it that's no longer needed just to enable long-term health of that whole ecosystem that's now worldwide and in places you don't even realize. So, short-term blip, long-term good thing.
Yeah, that was a very, very interesting points you raised there, Bill. And okay, I'm going to own up. I'm actually recording this on a Linux box as well at the moment. But there you go. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think Bill's the expert on this, but I think everything Bill said is correct. And I suspect there may be some software that might stop working, I suppose, when this update comes out. But, I guess people need to update the way things work. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, if it's not being looked at, not being maintained, then, we all know that IT vulnerabilities are a major issue, people getting hacked, etc. So, these vulnerabilities need to be managed. And unfortunately, if it's not being kept up to date, then it has to go. But, I don't think it's something that's that difficult to get around. Rather than being kind of baked into the kernel in Linux, it's something that will be, people will need to write as a separate software, that's all. So I don't think it's the end of the world. It just means that people that are maybe using this protocol for amateur radio networking or packet radio will need to perhaps update some things, that's all, for things to continue to work.
Oh, yeah. Frank, I know you're also a Linux user. Is this going to affect you in any way?
It should not. For example, what the two previous presenters said, I totally concur. And it's just, we haven't had a commit, which is a request to insert something in as far as this particular AX.25 protocol is concerned to the kernel. And if you don't use it, then do you need it? And that's a little bit of the metric that goes on in this type of development. And as Bill said, we want the kernel to be, as lean as it needs to be. People criticize Microsoft for having machines with Windows bloatware on it, which bloats the size of that, but you probably don't need it, and then perhaps don't know that it's there. So I'm in full agreement. Echolink and All-Star, for example, two VoIP-based communication protocols that are increasing on All-Star and increasing in popularity. Well, they don't use the native Linux kernel 8.25 library. They do it from either Python or build that in. And so I don't see it involving me whatsoever.
Okay, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Now, Leslie, I'm waiting for you to ask me what Linux is. No, I'm joking.
No, I've been listening to Bill and Frank and find it very, very, it's not my thing that I'm involved in. I'll put my hand up to that. But I've been finding their explanation of what's been happening very, very interesting indeed. So over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that this is a software thing, and unless you use Linux and packet radio and things like that. But it was something I thought was worth mentioning to our listeners, because some will, and if you suddenly come across an issue, this might be
It's
what's
all part of the
happened.
hobby. It's all part of the hobby.
Yeah. So effectively, some different news stories this episode. That was our last news story, a different one, so hopefully you found them interesting. Right, let's find out what the guys been up to since the last time we spoke to them. Bill, you might be on a hard stop soon, so I'm going to get you go first.
Yes, thank you very much. I have been experimenting and playing around with Ether SDR. This is a Linux native client for Flex Radio Systems transceivers. So basically, a gentleman decided to write a Linux version compatible with Smart SDR so that he can talk to his Flex Radio on a Linux machine. And now this thing ended up being cross-platform. It's Linux, Mac, Windows. I've been using the Linux app image version because it updates just about every day now, because he's using Claude AI to help write this thing. And so it seems to be a release every day or so, or every other day. But every day it's just dramatic. Folks report what doesn't work, fixes it up, next version. And now we're at 0.921 as of the time of this recording. So I go grab the app image and execute it. For those that aren't familiar, Linux app images are basically, I don't want to say virtual, because that's a bad description, but it's an all-in-one package ready to run without installing. So you just execute the thing. It's not like a Docker container, but it does have some level of abstraction, so it works on many platforms. So I've been using it on Debian 13 and Linux Mint on my laptop. I have spent quite a bit of time messing around with it, and so far it works okay. A little rough around the edges, but it's definitely getting there. I was able to do one SSB QSO through it on the laptop, and it worked okay. I worked that special event station for W1AW/0, and that was okay. And then after that, I worked a whole pile of FT8 stations. So here's this is funny because, the stuff that you can do that you don't think you can do. I have Ether SDR running on the laptop. I have a WSJTX running on the laptop. I'm logging locally to my local I use PyQSO. And I have a little script I run that echoes out the log data out when you hit log station in WSJTX to send out to my Windows PC. So it shows up in both log books. So I was messing around with that. It's very busy for the month, but I ended up probably about 3 dozen, maybe 4 dozen FT8 stations from this thing. So that definitely works well. I'm still working on figuring out an interface for my paddles for CW yet. He has support in there for CW. He does have a CW decoder in there, which when it locks on, it seems to work reasonably well. Nothing is as good as my KX3. The CW decoder on that's just phenomenal. I just can't believe how well that actually catches the characters when my brain doesn't. But this is a real big possibility for those that are Flex users, because before now you had Smart SDR in Windows, or you had the Mac client Smart SDR for Mac and iOS if you have it on your iPhone or iPad. But now we're getting a real cross-platform client for Flex, and so this is going to be incredibly exciting. And that's about all I have for this month.
Well, sounds like you've been busy, Bill. And as I say, I know lots of shacks. I mean, I'm going to say I can't imagine any shack without having a computer in it these days. Even if it's just for logging, looking up the DX commands, see what is on, all those sort of things. So, sounds like you've been doing a lot. Frank, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke on the podcast?
Martin, I've also been looking at the Ether SDR software that Bill just so eloquently covered, and I agree with him at what it represents. Flex Radio has said for a number of years, we have an API. Some of you can use it, and they aren't looking at Linux. And what's happened, as Bill said, this has turned into a native Linux app and has spectacular possibilities, and that's wonderful. So I've been looking hard at that. Number two, continuing to do research on POTA, plus Where the Hams Are series that I mentioned last time. And that's a good bit of work in the background. Currently focusing right now on the growth of POTA. I gave a talk to Pennine Hams group, such a wonderful, receptive group of folks in the Pennine Hams club. Nick Bradley kind of maintains that, and I talked about experimental HF antennas, basically the same talk that I gave to the Sutton and Cheam Club some time ago, and was happy to do that and had a lot of good feedback. So I am preparing things for some surgery. I have a rotator cuff tear in my right arm. I'm right-handed. And so I'll have that done in early March, and they'll use something called a cow patch approach. And a company has literally taken the Achilles heel of a cow and made a project called Regenitin. They make 3 slits, fairly small slits, quarter of an inch. It may be too much. And they roll that cow patch up and then put it in and manipulate it with rods and things. And it goes on top of your rotator cuff, kind of like a Band-Aid. But in this case, the Band-Aid actually grows into your rotator cuff after 6 months, and it's supposed to be stronger than the original rotator cuff. Any of the listeners had rotator cuff surgery or problems, you know that's a real challenge. Should be less of a rehab time. So I'm likely to miss the next cycle of which I would be on this a podcast group. So I will miss an episode or two, but we'll certainly try to be back very soon. Glad to get this done. It's been nagging me, and it's kept me from doing some work on antennas out in the field for obvious physical limitations. Martin, that's what I've been doing.
Well, I know you've been busy, and you and I have had a couple of chats a couple of times over the last few weeks as well. So, yeah, I know you've been busy, and let's hope that all goes well for you, Frank. I believe it will, because I know you've researched it well. Leslie, what have you been up to apart from trying to antagonise undertakers?
They're not getting my business for a while yet, I can say so. But anyway, and when my sister came in to collect the policies, I thought, I'll back it up. Anyway, so apart from being ill, I was going to give a talk to the Amateur Radio Society, but unfortunately I've cancelled that for another day. But I promise I will do it for them. That's definitely on the list. The other thing is, I came into my possession a N6200 transceiver, that little HF transceiver on 50 megs, QRP. It's all self-contained. It's got an ATU, built-in ATU, and I've just been enjoying that and trying to learn how to use it. So very, very good indeed. A little 8 watts with an external 12 volts, but it's very, very good indeed. And I'm just hooking it up to various bits of antennas at the moment and just seeing what I can work. That's unfortunate about it for this month for obvious reasons, Martin. Anyway, over to you.
Yeah, as I say, I know you haven't been very well for a couple of weeks, and playing with the new rig sounds fun, mate. So at least you're back in the fold now and playing, which is good.
Yeah.
Chris, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke on the podcast?
Yeah, so as usual, not a huge amount of activity, I'm afraid. I did operate HF at the weekend. I managed to work New York on 20 metres on 100 watts, which I thought was pretty good. And I had a nice chat with a guy there. He was in New York State. He wasn't in the city. He was out in the mountains somewhere, but that was pretty good. And we had our Sutton and Cheam Radio Society AGM a couple of weeks ago, and I'm glad to report that, Martin, you are now back as our chairman. I'm sure you'll talk about that when we get round to you, but it was actually quite well attended. Unusually for an AGM, we actually had, I think, 11 or 12 people there, which is a lot more than previous years, and we had quite a good, healthy conversation about how the club's run, etc. So that was good. I do, however, continue as the club secretary, and but glad to have you on board, back on board, should I say, Martin, as our chairman. But that's about it from me. Thank you.
All right. So I know you've been busy at work as well. Yes, you're right. I did re-stand for a chairman of Sutton and Cheam. We haven't had one for about I think it's about 3 years. I decided to stand up because I felt I was partly doing the job anyway. But I've always supported the club. I don't believe titles are important. You know, if you're a member of a club, you support that club. So yes, I'm back as chairman. Did take part in 145 Alive on the 18th, Saturday the 18th. 145 Alive in the UK is just get on the air, VHF, FM, and work as many people as you can. Now, there's a number of nets, but we do join the nets and jump in and out and work as many people as you can. And it's great fun. It runs for about 3 hours. Doesn't have to be too much hard work, and we thoroughly enjoyed doing that. I've been on the talk group a little bit, quite a bit actually, and this Saturday, the Saturday before the podcast goes out, is our talk group net on the Saturday the 2nd between 7 and to 11 UTC. Unfortunately, this is something you guys need to do. I used to put a lot of posts out onto Facebook, and a lot of groups asked me to join them, and I was Facebook posting all the things we do. Facebook decided to ban me the other day. So I would suggest, if you want to keep in touch with what's going on and you were spotting my posts out on the internet, please join the ICQPodcast newsletter group. All you have to do is go to our website and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll find out that they're there. I'm not as active now on Facebook as I was because I've got my account back, but I was banned for a bit for putting too many posts out. I did have a 17-foot whip, telescopic whip with a little red block at the bottom where you plug your PL259 in and the stake into the ground. And where you plug the stake into the ground, there's a ground plane that with wires. Now, the original one from AliExpress, the ground plane was effectively ribbon cable, which you split apart. And when I looked, it didn't seem to work particularly well. And when I looked at it, they crimped all this ribbon cable, but they crimped over the top of the insulation. So the earth lead was actually not connected to the earth part of the aerial. So I made up a new ground plane system for it, and I was going to give that a try this week. That's good. RT Systems. I've been playing with my ICOM 9700. Couple of things. I upgraded the firmware in my 9700, and my programming software from RT Systems decided not to work. And I got a bit upset about it, obviously. And then I found it said, upgrade the system. Well, it didn't actually quickly tell you how to do it, but what I found was if you go to the directory where you've installed the RT Systems software for your IC 9700, there's an application there that says upgrade. If it won't work the first time you put it, if it still says, oh, the programming software is running, it's because when you shut the programming software down, it doesn't totally clear it all out of memory. So the computer says, oh, no, it's still running. So you have to reboot your machine for a clean boot and then run the upgrade, and it'll go off to RT Systems, download the various bits and pieces and upgrade the software for you, which was quite handy because the way the 9700 works is when you do a change anything in the programming software, you maybe put an extra line in. When you upload to the radio, the first thing it does is wipes everything out of the radio and then writes the programming file in. But if it crashes, it's wiped everything and it doesn't write anything in. So you end up with a virgin machine, which was a bit annoying. So the upgrade fixed that. And a little bit upset, the IC 9700 does tend to drift off frequency when you dekey. This seems to be a known fault on the internet. There are a couple of fixes. One is to fit a GPS to lock it to a frequency, and the other one is a little hardware mod. I think I might probably do both to mine in the near future. But it's just an annoyance. You dekey and the receive frequency changes and you go, no, so you then have to put the frequency back on, which is doable. It's not that upsetting, but it's doable, but an annoyance. So that's a couple of things I've been up to. Apart from that, the talk group's been busy and I've just been enjoying myself. So, I think we've all had a little play, so that's a good news. So all that's left for me to do now is to thank the guys for turning up, and we'll move to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, guys. Thanks for inviting me again.
Yeah, good to have you, Chris, as always. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMA.
Thank you, Martin, and guys, enjoyed it as always.
Yeah, great to have you. I'd like to thank Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, good. And last but not least, I'd like to thank our Leslie, G0CIB.
Thanks for having me on, Martin. It's been very informative tonight.
Yeah, a different set of news stories tonight,
That's
but
fine.
it was good. Okay, I'll say 73s and we'll move on to the next part of the podcast. 73, guys.
Cheerio.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.ICQPodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.ICQPodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. We start with news here that Rocket Lab have successfully launched 8 satellites for Japan in the month of April, late April, and it was part of the Kakushin Rising mission, and it's supporting Japanese Aerospace Exploratory Agency's innovative satellite technology demonstration program. So the rockets have deployed, these various satellites. It includes Magnaro 2, Kosin 2R, FSI Sat 2, to name but a few. Now the good thing is some amateur stuff in them as well. So there's gonna be some IOU coordinated satellites, including the Magnaro 2, the Kosin 2R, the Wazada Sat 02, and the Ayara 2 satellite. They have amateur radio downlinks in the VHF and the UHF bands. There's also as well early reports that SACNOG's network have picked up some CW as well signals coming in from those satellites as well. So lots of information, lots of potential there for amateur radio use. We'll put all the information on ICQPodcast.com for you, and you guys can pick for that and as I say hopefully work those new satellites that have been launched into the atmosphere. Also happening, in late April, was some changes to AMSAT to the TLE distribution. So two-line elements, often referred to as Keplerian elements or KEPs, are inputs to the SGP4 standard mathematical model of spacecraft orbits used by most amateur radio tracking programs. So these weekly updates, completely adequate for amateur radio use in satellites, and these changes have been made. They're going to be updated on the first hour of UTC every day. So you might need to make some small tweaks for there. We'll pop a link again to that for you if you take in that information. And a final bit of news in brief, something here for your calendars. On the 9th of May, amateur radio operators will be participating in the Department of Defence's Armed Forces Day Crossband test. It's an annual event, but there's no impact on public or private communications. So for 50 years, we've been helping out the military on this event. And as I say, it's going to be very important that takes place. Military stations will transmit on selected military frequencies and will announce Pacific ARS frequencies they are monitoring. All times will be in Zulus, and the frequencies are upper sideband unless stated otherwise. So a lot of information on this for you. We'll pop that for you on ICQPodcast.com, and you can check out the latest information there for you. Right, well then we head over to our featured episode where we'll have our interview with AMSAT President Drew Kilo Oscar 4 Mike Alpha. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now for this episode's feature from the ICQ Podcast.
Hello, everybody. This is Frank, K4FMH, with another feature interview for the ICQ Podcast. Along with me once again, he's in Eastern Pennsylvania, keeping all the bad guys out of his employer's computers. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Frank. Yeah, I'm at an undisclosed bunker location in Eastern Pennsylvania.
But I can tell you that he personally decorated the wall paintings in his undisclosed location. So he's quite an artist. And glad to have you on once again, Bill. Okay, now if you told your neighbors that you like talking to the birds, well, they might look puzzled, if not downright suspicious of you. But our guest not only does just that, he also leads an organization devoted to having more birds to talk to and teaching others to engage in certain conversation with as many birds as possible. Well, of course, ham radio listeners know I'm talking about birds as the euphemism for radio amateur satellites, not animals. Communicating with amateur satellites is really a growing interest in the ham radio hobby. The Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, commonly known as AMSAT, has thousands of members. I myself am a life member of AMSAT, and it's my pleasure to welcome the president of AMSAT, Drew Glasbrenner, KO4MA, to the podcast. Welcome, Drew.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and have come in and talk to you guys tonight about AMSAT.
It is, in fact, an important activity. I recently finished a study for Radio Amateurs of Canada, the 2021 National Survey. When they ask about 36 behaviors, do you do X? Satellite operations came in at about 16%. However, some other specific satellite-oriented behaviors, such as amateur radio on the International Space Station, or ARIS, was another 14%. Still better, Earth, or moon bounce, which technically doesn't involve a satellite, but is pretty close type of activity. That was about 3.5%. And so along comes radio astronomy at about 3%. So when you kind of add those up, Drew, at least for Canada, you've got about a third of all the hams in Canada saying they do something either directly involving satellite comms or pretty aligned with satellite communication. What does AMSAT know about your members, and what is your rough total membership today?
Well, we've got approximately 4,000 members in AMSAT, and out of that 4,000 members, about 2,000 of them are life members. So some of those go back to the early days of AMSAT, and we we're trying to grow the membership, and we're having some success in that. Last year at the symposium and the board meeting, we took on an initiative to increase the number of students in our ranks. Prior to October last year, we had a student membership that was basically half price. And we went ahead and made that free for any students under 25 and through the university level. And with some evidence of that, an EDU address or something like that. Because if we don't start growing the organization and getting it to skew a little bit younger, our days are numbered.
That is certainly something ham radio writ large is facing. And from most of the data that I and Bill have seen, we don't know the exact number for median age, but we know that they're certainly getting up there. That sounds like a very innovative program. Bill, you're at a university. I'm a retired professor. What's your sense of your students at your university in terms of stuff like this? Is this the kind of thing that Drew's talking about that might attract them to be members of AMSAT?
I think the universities that have either active amateur radio clubs, or I'm thinking of not us, but places like Vanderbilt that have a space sciences program, that's definitely going to be very interested for those kind of students. But I applaud it. It's a great idea. Get them in while they're in college, after they get careers, they may continue on and come back to it later in midlife. And it's a good way to get them awareness of the organization and all the good stuff you guys are working on.
And that's certainly true. I know some other schools, I think Virginia Tech comes to mind, some with aerospace programs. They've actually, Drew, correct me if I'm off here, but they've actually designed CubeSats and things that have gone up into space. Is that not correct?
There's a number of universities. Just about every state now has had a university CubeSat launched. Some of them many, many times over. And AMSAT has worked with them in the past and are doing so in the present. All of our Fox satellites, the 5 CubeSats that we launched over the past 11 years, all had university payloads on them. Vanderbilt flew radiation experiments. Virginia Tech flew a camera. And that's been an important part of our ability to get NASA-funded launches is student involvement.
Well, certainly NASA and what's going on with the Artemis 2 mission just still hot in the news cycle a bit. That got a young person on CNN to say, why are you excited about this? Well, we're going to the freaking moon. And so you capture the joy. Here was a young lad, I think about 11, from Little Rock, Arkansas, as I recall. You capture some of that sentiment, and I can imagine being a university student involved in designing and putting together something, in this case a CubeSat, that's going to go into space. They may be too cool for school to express it like the 11-year-old did, but inside, they're thinking.
I just came back from the CubeSat Developers Workshop, which is in Cal Poly in California. In Cal Poly is where CubeSats were invented. So it's a very good workshop. And there's always a lot of students there. Most of the presentations are from students. And most of the discussion is students and vendors or mentors. They even have a career fair on the last day. And seeing the enthusiasm for space out of these students is really something to see and makes it worthwhile. I had the opportunity to have a drop-in talk. They had somebody that wasn't able to make it. So I got to talk to the whole group about satellites for 15 minutes and AMSAT in general and what we were up to. And then 2 of the 3 days, we did some demonstrations out in the courtyard during lunch, which were well attended. And the first day, we made some contacts through RS-44, and the second day, we made some contacts through the ISS repeater as it went overhead, and lots of drop jaws, people that here at a CubeSat conference that didn't realize you could do that with a ham radio license and some walkie-talkies.
Right. I'm going to flip it over to Bill, but here on the podcast, we cover stuff about satellites in general because related to a lot of things. We track some of the commercial internet type of launches and failed launches and things like that, and have oohed and awed over just how much is up there. I think in the last podcast Bill and I were on, we likened it a little bit to the old game Frogger, that the next Artemis mission, they may have to kind of get up and look, hey, is the coast clear to get through this? But I'm going to throw it over to Bill to follow up. Bill is much more involved in working sats than I. Bill?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So, like you said, over the last 11 years, you got 5 of the Fox series CubeSats, which I nicknamed Easy Sats because I've shown dozens of technicians 2 HTs, arrow antenna, bandpass filter on one of them. Away you go. Set your Doppler on program in memories, and away you go. Point at the sky. iPhone apps, Android apps, will track them. It's way, 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 way easier than it was back in the 90s. And I love that so much. But the next one in the pipeline that's been in there for a few years is the Golf T satellites, your test bed one, and then Golf 1. What's the status with that project?
Well, it's moving along. We had a setback last year when the new administration came in with some of the budget cuts. The CSLI program partially disappeared. Now, CSLI is the NASA-funded educational CubeSat launches. The missions that had not been manifested yet were basically dropped. And we're going to hear very soon whether they get picked back up or not. If they don't get picked back up, we're going to have to pursue a commercial launch for it, which is not as difficult as it was in years past. It's just a number, a dollar sign, matter of dollar signs to make that happen.
Yeah, there's multiple commercial vendors now that are launching satellites for less, but nothing as good as the programs that got you on there for free.
Yeah, nothing's as good as free. And there's been a lot of additional pressures that have slowed the program down beyond what we really wanted. I'll back up a little bit. In addition to those 5 CubeSats that we flew, we also flew payloads on 2 other CubeSats that sometimes get missed. MainSat 1 and HuskySat both carried our LTM-1 linear transponder module as their primary radio. And then it also had a 30 kilohertz, both of them had 30 kilohertz wide transponders on them. Both have went silent and re-entered at this point. So that's part of the problem. We need to rearrange how we're thinking about satellite programs to make things move a little faster, and providing LTMs to other organizations, student organizations and colleges to fly as their primary CubeSat radio really is a nice quid pro quo. They get a free radio and AMSAT ground station network support, and we get a free transponder in return. That's worked out really well. And we've got a couple more of those in the pipeline that I can't announce yet, but they're out there. I signed an MOU on one of them this weekend. So we'll have more short-term efforts that should come to fruit pretty quickly. Some of the problems with golf have been related to parts availability, not to make excuses, but there's been a couple of different things that have really impacted us. Starting with COVID, we lost our mechanical engineer. He passed away, which when in a small team, that's just absolutely devastating. So we're recovering from that. And I think the last estimates I saw is that by the end of the year, we should have something ready for testing and manifest on launch. At the same time, with Golf T, we have Fox Plus, which are follow-on 1U CubeSats to the Fox series. Fox Plus A and Fox Plus B should both be about ready by the end of the year. The first one will probably carry the linear transponder module, and the second one we hope to have a PACSAT board on. PACSAT was presented initially a couple of years ago at the Dallas Symposium, and it's basically everything that was in the 1990s microsats like AO16 shrunk down to one 4-inch CubeSat size radio card. And that'll have 4 different uplinks and 1 downlink. It'll run the PACSAT protocol where you can listen to all the files coming down and request fills on the pieces that you missed. It's very efficient. And it'll also work as a digipeater. So those are kind of the 3 different programs that we have leading to assets on orbit. Golf T, Fox Plus, and the university partnerships with LTM and PACSAT.
Oh, that's very good. Yeah, there's a lot of activity there. And you're correct. The global supply chain plus engineering efforts, it's been a challenging few years. And, I don't think a lot of folks realize, but you don't take off the shelf parts. A lot of this stuff has to be hardened to survive the even in low Earth orbit, it's outer space.
That's one of the missions of Golf T, is to fly and test what we call the RTIHU, the Radiation Tolerant Internal Housekeeping Unit, which is a computer system that was put together to operate in space and has all of its own challenges with radiation and not being able to go up and hit the reset button. So that's one of the primary payloads on Golf T. There's a 10 gigahertz high-speed downlink, digital downlink that we're testing. That's what originally was supposed to get us the CSLI ride. There's another SDR in there that is basically a commercial SDR that's been modified to fit in the spacecraft. And we have a 3-axis attitude control module from a company in South Africa that will be the first time we've flown 3-axis control in a CubeSat. If you're going to have a 10 gigahertz downlink with a high gain antenna, you have to be able to accurately point that at the Earth. We can't rely on the old bar magnet trick to keep the antennas generally in the same direction. So there's a lot going into this little thing that's smaller than a loaf of bread. There's multi-band antennas, deployable solar panels, whereas a 1U CubeSat makes between 2 and 3 watts of power per orbit average. We're hoping to get up to about 40 watts by deploying 3 solar panels on each side and point them towards the sun all the time. So there's a lot packed into this little guy.
And it's going to be a higher orbit, so you have a larger footprint as well.
Well, not Golf T.
Okay.
The original plan for the Golf satellites was to get them to a higher orbit and use a deorbit device to bring them in. There's been a lot of changes in orbital debris mitigation requirements. And right now, the rule is that you have to re-enter within 5 years of end of mission. So that limits us to about 550 or 600 kilometers. With the deployable panels, that adds a lot of drag. So we may be able to squeak out a little bit higher than that. But it's also where the bus is going. Most launches now are through SpaceX. They have 2 different series, transporter and bandwagon launches. And these are basically, with transporter, it's a bus that goes every 3 months. And you buy your ticket and you fly to where the bus is going. And the bus drops you off no higher than 600 kilometers.
Okay, that explains that a lot because, you have to pay to get there.
Yeah. We had originally looked for a 1,200 kilometer launch, and we had some feedback from NASA that was a possibility. And we looked at using different types of drag devices to bring us in to meet that requirement. That requirement previously was 25 years. And that was a lot easier to work with. Unfortunately, at the time, all of the drag devices that we could find that would fit on a 3U CubeSat and do what we wanted were not approved by NASA. They were not up to the readiness level that NASA expects to be relied on for debris mitigation. So it's kind of a catch-22. One of the things that I've brought to the table and wanted to focus on is finding more hosted payload opportunities. If operating in LEO used to be pretty simple, and with the number of things flying around now, I get a constant stream of emails from NORAD telling me that something's passing within 100 meters of one of our satellites. And that's difficult. The restrictions placed on us by orbital debris and by the FCC on some other things, and NOAA, if we have a camera, have become really onerous. So we're looking at some opportunities to fall back to what we know best, building the radios and putting the radios on somebody else's satellite in a higher orbit. And that might be anywhere from high LEO, it might be MEO, it might be with the GPS satellites, it might be a hitchhiker on a geostationary satellite. We're out there scouring the world. We're out there scouring, trying to find these opportunities. And if you're not carrying 7 or 8 figures around in your back pocket, it's kind of difficult.
Yeah, that was the AMSAT DL win of the century. Was they got on that geostationary satellite with what became QO100. And that thing is amazingly popular over in the area that you can get to it.
Sure. And why wouldn't it be? I mean, it's a 24-hour, 20 meters open all the time to half of the world. And it
set up and leave it pointed.
Yeah, it's a great project. It's a great satellite, and it was an absolute win for AMSAT DL. Now, since we brought it up, there is I don't want to call it a follow-on project because it's a little different, but ESA, the European Space Agency, has made some noise recently about a follow-on project for QO100. Basically another geostationary satellite or payload to service their member countries. And luckily, Canada is an associate member of ESA, and they have so far planned to include coverage of Canada if possible. So we'll be a beneficiary of that, unless they use a spot beam, but I don't think they'll do that.
It might be close enough for the spot beam.
So they're calling it Future Geo, and it's just a plan right now. It's, I don't think it's funded yet. I attended some early meetings on it, participating with AMSAT UK. At the time, AMSAT represented Canada and the US. Since then, Canada has spun off their own AMSAT group. So initially, I participated representing this part of the world and helped AMSAT UK with their proposal. And then was another meeting in Germany that I participated in virtually, where they talked about some of the goals. And I think Future Geo will probably duplicate the capabilities of QO100 and add some upper frequencies like 24 and 47 gigahertz, at least to get some activity in that band, and as a good source of a good experimental signal source.
Oh, that's very good. I'm going to bounce it back over to Frank for some of his questions now.
Well, let me follow up with that. Drew, I think what you're saying about the possibility of a stationary satellite with at least some coverage for CONUS US would be spectacular. I'm one that praises appliance operators in the following sense. Now, I've got a very robust RF bench. I like to build things, like to design things, especially antennas. So I'm not decrying that. But I think there is a place for hams writ large getting into sort of a complex area for a turnkey appliance thing. Just imagine ASL rotor, whether it's an Arrow or Elk antenna or another dual band antenna, where it's plug and play. You think, well, what are they going to learn with that? They're going to learn to love it. And when they do, then they're going to learn, build, and improve. Now, that's my theory as a former educator in introducing things. And we're not quite there yet on the consumer end. Now, we don't have probably as many satellite aficionados in the rank and file ham club as we might here in Jackson, Mississippi, 2 hours west in Vicksburg. Russ Tillman used to, I think, edit the journal for AMSAT some years ago. So we've got a couple of guys, Eddie Pettis, who runs all the comms for the Corps of Engineers around the country. He's still got his trailer with his rack of beams, and I'll get him to come to some library things and stuff like that. Point I'm getting at is, imagine having a stationary satellite and then having approaches to young people, or some of us people who are young at heart, late in life hams, who are some of the fastest growing segments of amateur radio in the U.S., where they can get on almost all the time. And when you schedule some of these demonstrations and you go, well, I got my old satellite TV guide out, and the pass is not for another 2 hours, and folks, kind of stand around on one foot and the other. So what you're saying is, I think we'll make an incredible potential splash toward demonstrations and outreach education. But then AMSAT's got 100 paid employees and oodles of volunteers and got cash running out your ears. So what are you waiting on, Drew? Tell us about how AMSAT is organized.
Well, here's the first thing. AMSAT is a completely volunteer organization. Up until 5-6 years ago, we did have an office manager that was paid. She retired, and we have moved to a virtual office and saved quite a bit of money. Our office in Washington, D.C. is no longer on our budget. So, we've saved money where we can. We have no paid employees. We're all volunteer, and it's a tough row to hoe sometimes. Money is not always the biggest problem. A lot of times finding competent volunteers with time and dedication. We get a lot of volunteers that'll step up, and we appreciate that, but they don't always last very long.
Right.
So when you're putting together a satellite, you need a dedicated team of volunteers that stick with it till completion. And sometimes that can be difficult. Money, there's two different ways to look at it. AMSAT has been the beneficiary of some large gifts recently in the last couple of years, which has filled our bank account a little bit. So we can't afford to sometimes take the shortcut and buy a piece of commercial hardware instead of trying to build it ourselves. And that's great, but it's still not the level of money that you need to go out and, put up a geostationary payload. I quite often at HamFest get people that ask me, well, why don't you just go ask Elon to launch it for us for free? And, that is both the biggest source of entertainment and frustration at the same time. Elon didn't get to be, soon to be the world's first trillionaire by giving stuff away. But they've also opened up launch opportunities. They've flown more satellites in the past year than the rest of the world combined. So it's easier to get to some parts of space, but it still costs money.
And that's something I hope our listeners will realize is that unlike, say, the American Radio Relay League is one and maybe some other organizations, AMSAT is indeed all volunteers. And many hams may come from the corporate world in terms of management. I've spent a career working, training, and studying volunteer organizations, and they're different. I'd like to say there's an intangible paycheck that volunteers get. They get acknowledged for their work in public. They get some resources that they need to do their job, or they know coming aboard they have to bring that resource. Sometimes a good auto mechanic brings his or her own tools, right, to the shop. And thirdly, a volunteer needs to have other people get the hell out of their way and let them do their job. So volunteer organizations, so that hassle level, you can run off good volunteers in a heartbeat by looking over their shoulder too much. So being in an all-volunteer organization is just a little different animal to manage. And I know you're, as president, even though I think you were elected back in maybe October, was that when you?
October last year, and I had previously been vice president of operations for 20 years.
So you'd sort of seen it up close and personal and knew a little bit of what you were getting into. So that's good there. But you probably get pulled in a tremendous number of directions. Now, you put out a quality magazine. As a life member, I get my copy every month, and I read it. And I know I used to be an editor for Springer, the largest scientific publisher in the world. They say, I haven't counted things, as well as for Taylor and Francis, the oldest publisher in the world. So I've been involved in the publishing world and have a feel for what it takes. And you publish a quality magazine. And I'm sure that's a labor of love for those involved with that. That helps get your message out for members. And I don't remember, but you probably give a sample issue away for those that do drive-by. What can others do, like us here on this podcast, do to help get your story out? We'd love to have you come back on some periodic basis when you've got some news to share to try to get that out. Because I know when you do it piecemeal, you just get beaten up as a president. When you got so many working emails will drown you. And so if we can be helpful and if it would be useful, we would love to help get AMSAT information out.
I think what you're doing is great. And just spreading the word about AMSAT is a huge, huge help. We're looking at some things to change possibly going forward. For anybody who's been around membership organizations, things are changing. People are not quite joiners like they used to be. So we're looking at possibly rearranging some things with AMSAT membership and maybe having 2 levels of membership. One that's, basically free, and one that is a voting donor level membership. And that gets more people under the tent and makes for easier information being spread and more enthusiasm in general. Some of the things that we have also been working on in that, I mentioned the student memberships earlier. Not everybody does social media, and I completely get it. But we have a very large presence on Facebook. We have a group with almost 20,000 people in it.
Wow.
You think that's 5 times more members than we have.
Right.
And one of the things that we've been doing to try to convert some of that interest into support for AMSAT is at the beginning of the year, we have a book called Getting Started on Amateur Satellites. And it's, I think, 174 pages, gets updated every year or two, usually right before Dayton. And it is a great primer on satellites, just everything you need to know to get started. Well, not too many people buy paper books anymore. So whereas we used to have that for $30 at the Ham Fest and we shipped them back and forth across the country, you can still buy a paper copy on our website, but we have a digital copy for $15. And it's basically a donation to AMSAT. We included that with all of our memberships. So if you go in and join AMSAT while the promotion's still running, we haven't set an end time quite yet on it, you'll get that Getting Started guide for free. And if you ended up sharing that with somebody, I'm not going to tell anybody. Any more people we can bring under the tent and get interested in satellites is good for us in the long run.
Let me suggest this. And because I've worked with libraries, after I retired as a faculty member, became emeritus, I went to work for the Board of Regents for the university system in Georgia. And you know how things go. Okay, Howell, we got to have somebody deal with the public libraries. Why don't you do that? So that was one of my jobs. And I would go to their meetings, and my instructions were, don't get in their way, but if they start doing anything weird, tell us. I mean, you know how that goes, right?
Right.
So I learned a lot about public libraries. And let me say, and I'll be glad to talk with you as a follow-up, if there was some thinking that digital book could go to public libraries, and I know you have to kind of look at how that's done, you would begin to reach an incredible number, not just of young people. The Gallup organization published a study just a few years ago that showed, surprise, surprise, public libraries are the most common crossroads, more than movie theaters and more than any other place. I don't know if they named Walmart, but you get my point, for women and young people. And so that's a crowd that ham radio really needs both. So let's talk some more and see if there's a way that AMSAT can propagate that intro book under, some sort of restriction. You have to be a library patron or something. But let's think about that, because I think that would directly get into some markets that would be very good. And perhaps it might, if some foundation wanted to fund that effort, that's also doable. So just a thought.
It's interesting. We can follow up on that.
Let me ask you this. To what extent do you mine your membership? Here's what I mean by that. You obviously know who they are and where they are. That's pro forma on stuff. But one of the things that I think other groups, ARRL is certainly one of them, if it's this bill, if you don't look, you don't know who knows who. And very often, if you need a little leverage with, say, NASA or with others, who's on the Hill and who's a member of AMSAT who's on the friends and family list for their congressional delegation. I mean, you would never know this. I used to be a badged official at NASA Stennis Space Center, for example. So my point is that I think one thing that you might think about is how to identify influential members of AMSAT who could help you on some lobbying efforts here, there, and yonder. Kind of leave it like that.
That's always been kind of in your mental Rolodex about people who, one longtime AMSAT member calls them low friends in high places. So that's always something that you keep track of. And actually, if you look in my last Apogee view, the last column for the AMSAT journal I did, I've been having some problems getting in contact with a couple of integrators, launch vendors, and I actually asked for anybody who had any inroads into those groups to reach out, send me an email. Maybe we can get together, talk, and see if we can get an introduction going. There's one hosted payload group company in particular that I've done everything I can do other than go knock on their door to try to get in touch with them, and it hasn't worked so far. So, that's something we do and always keep in mind. And if there's anybody that listens to the podcast that has any ways in to any of these opportunities, feel free to reach out.
Well, that's the thing. You just never know, which is why I raised that. And ARRL's been working on HOA antenna restriction. And in my humble opinion, they've gone about it in ways that were sort of backwards until one of the division directors in Texas said, look, we're going to go directly to members of Congress and figure out who knows who. And that's been successful. Whether that particular bill legislation will get through or not, I'm not sure. Bill, I'm going to go back over to you. We've talked a little bit about the organization. AMSAT, like any other volunteer organization, gets beat over the head for various and sundry reasons. And Drew is correct. Ever since Robert Putnam published his famous book, Bowling Alone, we've got more people bowling than ever and fewer bowling leagues than ever. Why is that? People don't join groups much as they used to. Bill?
Yeah, I agree with that. That seems to be a demographic shift from folks being organization-based to small team-like based. I'm sure it seems like that because we're seeing that in the local amateur radio clubs as well. Their meetings are way smaller in some cases, and there's a few exceptions here and there. Keep picking on a few areas, and the ones that do events and special speakers and stuff tend to do a little bit better around here than the normal get together and talk about the 2-meter repeater groups. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of exciting stuff here going on, and I did pull up that article you mentioned because I joined the Facebook group while you guys were talking, and yeah, there's a lot of good stuff coming up here, and yes, getting in touch with partners and integrators. If anybody is working somewhere, get a hold of Drew, because that's definitely a good way to get started. The final, we covered quite a bit of topics here. The final question I actually have for Drew Frank is, you talked earlier about, the space junk problem, which I just, there's one large low Earth orbit ISP right now, and it looks like there's 3 more coming in the next 24 months.
And more if you count in the Chinese.
Right.
They're launching their own constellation soon.
Yeah. And that's going to make certain layers of low Earth orbit very, very, very busy for physical traffic. I mean, space is big, but the closer you get to the planet, it's not as big as you think it is. But so there's you already mentioned issues with, you're getting emails now about stuff getting close to the existing satellites and, hey, collision warnings and that kind of stuff. But are we starting to see a time when we're starting to actually see RF interference to satellites based on all these internet devices up there?
We haven't seen it in the amateur spectrum from other satellites. With some, let me back up and clarify that a little bit. We are constantly having to stave off commercial intrusions into especially the UHF amateur band. And we're secondary on UHF, and the amateur satellite part of UHF is 435 to 438. So I'm speaking specifically to that 3 megahertz range. Several years ago, the FCC made a push for many educational CubeSats to be licensed under Part 5 experimental service instead of the amateur service, which is okay. I can see the reason, and we're fairly agnostic as to what service you're under if you're an educational mission. But then there's other things that try to slide in. I also, in addition to AMSAT, I volunteer for the IARU Satellite Coordination Committee. So our job is to make sure that frequencies are assigned to minimize interference between satellites. You can't have 3 satellites on the same launch that have the same frequency range or same frequency as something else already in orbit. But it's also kind of a firewall against commercial interests. By having to go through that process, we really carefully look at where some of these satellites are coming from. The Internet of Things explosion has led to a lot of satellites trying to slip into the amateur service. A lot of them are operating spread spectrum, LoRa, very low data rate, but spread spectrum, 60 or 100 something kilohertz wide. And a lot of those have commercial interests. They may say they're amateur, but they're commercial. So that's been an issue with the cheap launches and proliferation of new space. Some of the other problems that we run into is with the proliferation of really inexpensive radios like Baofangs, and I probably shouldn't have said the name out loud.
But everybody would have been thinking it. So
yes, exactly. That sort of radio, something you can buy for $25 on Amazon and have it the next day with absolutely no instructions or education about services or rules or regulations. Here you go. Here's your radio. Plug whatever frequency you want in on it and go. 2 meters is becoming increasingly crowded with non-amateur activity. Right here in Central Florida, if I point north and we have just a little bit of tropo, I hear stations every 25 kilohertz at the Deer Club, 100 miles north of here. And none of them are amateur. They just bought a radio off of wherever, and that's where they're using it. It's much, much worse in South America, Mexico, other parts of the world where regulation exists even to a lesser extent than it does here. And a lot of our satellites like FO29 and RS-44 that have 2 meter linear transponder uplinks, if you listen to them while they're to the south, especially to the south, everywhere, but especially to the south, quite often you hear taxi cabs, you hear, all sorts of stuff. It's not amateur. So there is some pressure, but it's not really from the big constellations that are up there. One of the interesting things related to that is I noticed that SpaceX is now talking about orbital data and AI satellites. And that's very interesting. A lot of people are, kind of naysaying that, but SpaceX and Musk have done the impossible before, so I wouldn't discount them yet. But one of the interesting things is they're talking about going to disposal orbits. Anything above 2,000 kilometers, for example, AO7 is at 1,450 kilometers. So high LEO up to, I think it's 6,000 kilometers is dead smack in the middle of the inner Van Allen belt. Nothing survives there very long, but it's considered a disposal orbit. Technically, if you're in a LEO orbit, you can bring it down to re-enter to dispose of it, or boost it up above 2,000 to dispose of it. So with SpaceX or whatever subsidiary it is talking about going to a disposal orbit, that means they're going to be flying there. That means there may be opportunities for something higher, and we don't have to worry about bringing it back in. Orbital debris goes away. So it's always good to keep an ear to the ground and see what's coming on the next wave of new space.
We have some of those things, and Bill and I have covered this on a podcast on HF with high-speed trading. And they first came out, we're going to play music and we'll have some subtone. Well, that was quickly ferreted out by folks who reviewed that for the FCC. Then they came back. We won't have any interference. They had a fairly shoddy engineering report that even non-engineers could sort of see through if they were fairly adroit at basic RF engineering there. And so we have similar problems. I will say with your Deer Club problem, the ARRL does have a volunteer monitor program. I'm sure you're aware of it. I happen to be in that program, and we have been trying to figure out ways to approach VHF and UHF groups that have problems. Repeater jamming is certainly one of them. We were successful in a major repeater jammer. So if you feel like there's a problem, Drew, Riley Hollingsworth is the recipient of those things. But I've been involved using remote SDRs, doing time difference on arrival estimates to take a bale of hay into a handful of hay when you're looking for that needle, right? So listen, that you're telling us some new stuff, and maybe Mr. Bezos and his LEO project can aim better and get the satellite where it's supposed to go next time, and get some other opportunities for AMSAT to piggyback on. I will say this: aerospace engineering programs tend to place graduates in the aerospace engineering industry. Therefore, some PR of AMSAT to aerospace departments, to the extent your budget will allow, might be worth doing that, because they will see there's a group out here. Hey, and we may have a club. I'll get my license, and there you go. Drew, we've been covering, as Bill said, a number of things that are very exciting. Tell our listeners, what's it cost to join AMSAT?
AMSAT membership is $44 a year. And for that, you get the AMSAT Journal 6 times a year, which is probably considered our main benefit. You're supporting the amateur program. You're supporting representation in Washington when things come up that are threatening the amateur band. And we've just filed comments not too long ago on some satellites, commercial satellites, that are using amateur frequencies under a Part 5 license. So there's some spectrum defense stuff in there too. And you're supporting the next round of amateur satellites on orbit.
Very good. I since I became a life member, of course, I don't pay the annual due, so it's good to know. And that's a reasonable price. I think our listeners would compare that to some other groups, and that would be very good. Drew, we'd like to call on you again and have you come back and talk about some of these kinds of things. We have another group. We have sort of Team A, Team B. And on the other group, our colleague Ed, DD5LP, enjoys the QO100 and is also a set operator in Germany. And I think they have a robust membership there. So we're an international podcast, and we reach out to quite a number. Bill, do you have any finals for Drew?
Oh, I just wanted Drew to share how folks can learn and find out more about AMSAT on the World Wide Web.
Well, AMSAT.org has got a whole pile of information on it. You can join our AMSAT group on Facebook. You can follow us on X. You can swing by our big, huge booth and demonstration area at the Dayton Hamvention. And you can come see us on our 44th Space Symposium in Jacksonville this year, October 8th through the 11th.
Super.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
That is terrific. Listen, thank you once again. We've got Drew KO4MA, president of AMSAT here for the ICQ podcast.
Well, many thanks to our colleagues, Bill and Frank, there for their interesting chat there with the AMSAT President Drew. And hopefully, say something for everybody from that there. They're certainly a very active group. And as I say, it'd be great to hear from Drew. And say, welcome back anytime, Drew, to tell us more about the things that you guys are up to. So I really do appreciate that. Right, well, feedback from yourselves since our last episode, we do appreciate. And first piece of feedback coming 2 episodes back, we spoke about the new regulations for hams in Norway. And Dick, Foxtrot 8 Whiskey Bravo Delta says, congrats to Norway for creation of a new entry-level amateur radar license. Access to most of the amateur radar spectrum is positive. Limiting power to 10 watts is equally positive. It means that the new affordable QRP transceivers now on the market require a minimal financial investment for new operators, young ones, and others with limited financial resources. Portable ops will get everyone who is able out in the fresh air. Well done, Norway. There must be a lot of fresh air in Norway, and I think that pretty much concurs with a lot of our thoughts, Dad. I say it's a great opportunity for more access and more people in Norway. It's a good level to get everybody started.
Certainly is, Colin. And in fairness, when you operate QRP, 10 watts for SSB is a good amount of power. For years, up until about 18 months ago, the UK Foundation license holders were only allowed 10 watts, and they got out and did a hell of a lot and had a lot of fun. So, yeah, that's a good one. And if you're limited by power, because your license limited by power, it means you spend more time setting up your station properly, setting up your microphone gain, getting an antenna that's effective and got low SWR where you want to operate. Hopefully you don't need an antenna tuner because you don't want to be wasting power. But there's a lot to be learnt at 10 watts. I spent most of my HF playing up until a couple of years ago on 10 watts and below. Had loads of fun. So, it's not a limiter. It's things you can do. And I used to say to people, I'd rather get 3 contacts in an afternoon using 10 watts than 30 contacts using stupid amounts of power. So, and one thing I will say to them is, don't tell the other side what power you're running until they give you the signal report, because their ego won't be very happy when they find out they've just given you a 5 and 9 and you're running 10 watts and they're running like 400 watts. So, you'll get a true signal report first before you tell them how much power you're running.
So our next piece of feedback comes from Larry Wheeler, Whiskey 9 Quebec Romeo, and this is in relation to the news about the MFJ antennas moving across their manufacturing. And he says this is great news. Greene County, Indiana is one of the few counties in Indiana that has no zoning regulations. So it's a great opportunity to build an antenna range for amateurs and commercial antenna design. Thanks Larry for that piece of information. And sounds like not only they got the perfect manufacturing now partnership for this, but even maybe a great opportunity to test everything they're manufacturing straight off the production lines, Dad.
Yeah. Well, this is the part of MFJ. It's now been sold off for manufacturing antennas, so it's good news. There were some good antennas there. It would have been such a shame to have lost them. And although I say I've met Martin Dew from MFJ and I've got a lot of time for the man, it is nice that we are able to maintain some of his designs, and hopefully they'll come up with some other good ones going forward. Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, as I say, it sounds like with those regulations, as I say there, they've got plenty of opportunity to test away there and come up with some great ideas. Well, as I say, Digital Talk Group Nets continue on throughout 2026. As I say, we had our May one, yesterday, the day before we released this show. Hope you really enjoyed that net. Next one will be on the 6th of June. Check out ICQPodcast.com and the Digital Talk Group pages there for times, etc., and how you to get on. And not only can you talk to your fellow listeners of the ICQ podcast, but you might be able to catch your favourite presenter or two, not only on those nets, but also for other times throughout the week. So do check that out from there. Now, of course, if you enjoy what we do, and as I say, we've brought value your way, be we've entertained you, you've learnt something today, etc., we really would ask you to show the value by going to ICQPodcast.com/donate, and you can do what Paul Elliott, Golf Zero Tango X-Ray Lima, and our monthly and subscription donors have done, and that's they get the value from the show and they turn it into a monetary amount and they forward it to us, and they say helps us to keep us advert free and producing your show for you. So please do consider that. Very important website, ICQPodcast.com/donate. Right, I think that just about covers everything for this episode, Dad, of 482 of the ICQ podcast. Only thing left to do is something very, very important, of course, is to find Mrs. B a nice treat in the cupboard and make her a cup of tea.
Will do, Colin. I shall go down and make her a nice cup of tea in a minute. I'm sure there's some goodies in the cupboard. I saw some the other day. And we'll sit down and have a nice cup of tea. So that sounds good to me, Colin.
Perfect. Up on Storewall 73's all, and catch you on the fortnight's time. 73's.
73.